We have an incredible final keynote that's going to send us away with, I think, something that will round out the whole conversation we had here and when we started on day one in my introduction, looking at kind of the larger impact of the work that we're doing here. The world is in an interesting place. We are more connected than ever before. In some ways, we are finding community in ways that were never before possible, and it's a beautiful thing. And in other ways, we're finding ourselves feeling more lonely and isolated. We have an interesting political landscape. We have a lot of division. We have a lot of challenges that we're facing as a human race. And a lot of that's driven by community. And I truly believe that a lot of it can be solved and improved, and we can move in the right direction by truly understanding community, by taking all the lessons we've learned throughout humanity and applying it to this crazy new digital world that we have. And I think our final keynote here will really help us wrap our heads around that a little bit more. It'll be a really interesting conversation, and it'll send us off into have some good conversations in our closing party over some drinks. All right? So, in the age of increasing disconnect, how do we come together in community that matters? In this Q&A, Marya Bangee will speak about building intentional communities that use the power of story to connect individuals, deepen relationships, and transcend traditional boundaries. Marya is a founder and CEO of SELA, a social impact firm that brings stakeholders from different sectors together on projects that drive social change. Through SELA, she currently serves as the director of programming for Harness, an organization founded by America Ferrara, Wilmer Valderrama, and Ryan Piers-Williams to amplify the voices and underrepresented communities in popular culture. She will be interviewed by our very own Erica McGillivray. Please, one more time, give the biggest ever CMX welcome to Marya Bangee and Erica McGillivray.
Wow, that is incredible. That has got to be the best welcome I've ever seen. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited today to be here talking with you.
Yeah.
If you don't know Marya, she is amazing, incredible. Follow her on all the social medias. Look her up. Yeah, I'm super excited. So I wanted to start off with a little warning. We are going to talk politics. And to start off, I want to hit a deeply political question. What Harry Potter house are you?
I think that's a really important question. It speaks to the most important questions of our time. So this is a little bit cliche, but I really connect with Harry, and so I think I'm a Gryffindor. Who else is a Gryffindor? Right? Woo! Courage. That's what we need in this moment.
Well, spoiler, I'm a Slytherin.
Ooh. All right.
But don't worry, we can all get along. All of our Harry Potter houses must come together in this world. So you've come from a background in community organizing, specifically in politics, specifically in the Muslim American community. You've been leading national advocacy issues around freedom of speech, among other issues. Can you talk a bit about moments along that path and what really drew you to this work?
Yeah. So I've been mentioning to several of the organizers that I'm really blown away by the audience and by the feeling of this conference. Everybody's just so warm and welcoming. And I think there's something about being in community and being people that are very invested in community that brings you all together. And as a community organizer, I really resonate with that. For me, community saved my life. It's something that really, like being a part of like a strong community was something that helped me shape my identity, helped me understand how to view the world. And there were times, I was a sophomore in high school when September 11th happened, and I was wearing a headscarf. First person in my family to wear a headscarf. My parents were like, "What are you doing?" And so, I don't even remember, like 13 or 14, and I started getting bullied and like dealing with a lot of discrimination in high school. And so I wasn't shy, I was actually very angry. And so I used to fight back. But having a community helped a lot. It helped me feel a sense of connection with others. It helped me navigate that time. It helped me understand what was going on. And to me, I really fundamentally believe that community is a place for people to be able to go to be able to be safe and to connect with others around interests or passions or, something that they care about. And that's why I got involved with community organizing, because for me, after kind of September 11th, there was a lot of questions around who are Muslims, what is the Muslim community, can we trust these people, are they out to get us, and even though I was young, I felt this responsibility to step up and to say, this is who we are and this is what my community is all about. And so starting to get active on different issues was how I started to step into that space. And so in that role, I got involved with issues of civil rights and human rights and things like that. But eventually I actually stepped out of the Muslim community and I started organizing in lots of different types of communities. In Los Angeles, I'm from Los Angeles, a lot of kind of low income communities. I went to school in Orange County in kind of like very suburban, very upper middle class university. And then when I got my first like real organizing gig, I was in South LA in Watts. The first day on the job, I was between a shootout between the police and the Bloods. So you can imagine, suburban kid going into Watts, and that was my first day on the job. But really starting to get an experience of what does poverty look like for different communities. What does access to higher education look like? What does healthcare look like? And so I've always felt compelled by kind of like bigger questions around who do we call our community? How are some communities more disenfranchised? Which communities have more resources or more voice than others? So, yeah.
So since the November election, your work has taken really center stage, different political conversations. You're someone with an intersection of identities, and often you're asked to speak to represent these communities, whether it's a Muslim American community or a woman of color or just a woman. And then you're like doing all this behind the scenes work, which we'll get to, about influencing media. How do you balance like the feeling of responsibility to your communities?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I think it's really, we're in a culture now where I think many people claim to represent community, but aren't really grounded in community. And I think that's a really scary thing because we don't have a way of holding people accountable. And sometimes the national conversation is shaped by people who are not actually grounded in real experience. And I think that's very worrisome because what you end up having is these talking heads who are in the kind of most extreme viewpoints, talking to each other and defining how we understand the world versus people who are grounded in kind of like the everyday work. Like I think when you're a part of community, you understand like patience is a real thing that you have to learn and practice. Sacrifice is something that you have to understand. Compromise, like all of these things, like that's how you are in relationship with people, right? I mean, and so I think for me, when I started taking on more of a public role, one of the things I thought very intentionally about was who is my community or who are the communities that I say I represent or I say I serve, and how can they hold me accountable? And how can I make sure that there are systems of communication set up so that when I'm speaking or representing somebody in a public space that I am making sure to bring through what it is that my community actually feels. And so in a lot of the work that I do, a lot of it is going out to different leaders, going out to different organizers or everyday folks and just saying, what keeps you up at night? What are the things on your mind? What are your needs? How can we serve you? And I think to me that's a really important part of building authentic leadership is like staying grounded in community.
Are there any specific examples you can think of where you've gone out and sought that feedback?
Yeah. So we're helping organize this big event on Saturday, which will Harness is an organization we're going to talk about in just a second. So there's going to be 400 people from Hollywood, influencers, and heads of studios, et cetera, coming to this event, and I curate the program for that event. And there's going to be organizers and frontline activists from all over the country coming to speak on different issues, right? So I don't go and say, who's done the best TED Talk, you know, or who's the person that I think is like the most incredible, articulate speaker. I go to like communities in Los Angeles and I say, all right, you are the local Native American tribe. Who is part of your community that you has been there? You know what I mean? And who do you want to speak on your behalf? What are the issues that you feel like need to be said? And we do this very intentional listening process for a long period of time before we figure out who our speakers are going to be. So I think that's a really important piece. And one of the things that we've had in terms of feedback from our events is people are like, where do you find your speakers? Or where do you find these organizations? And for us, we're really invested in this idea of like building deep relationships and listening, and that is the most important piece, rather than saying this is the narrative or this is the story. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about Harness, and we have a little video to show you all. So let's watch that.
Today we reflect. Today we listen. Today we relate.
These are people who are seeking to fulfill their dreams, to build something great.
I'm not fighting this just for me. I'm fighting this for my brothers and sisters. This doesn't just...
Today we
That's pretty impressive.
We have an incredible AV team, for sure. Okay, why don't you actually explain Harness a little bit, and then we'll see if we can get the video to work.
Okay, sounds good to me. So I think they mentioned a little bit in the introduction. So Harness was started by America for Wilmer Valderrama and Ryan Pierce Williams. Here we go. That's the video, so maybe we can.
Hold on.
Today we reflect. Today we
There we
listen.
go.
Today we listen. Today we relate.
These are people who are seeking to fulfill their dreams, to build something great.
I'm not fighting this just for me. I'm fighting this for my brothers and sisters. This doesn't just affect me, it affects everyone.
In this time, we have to breathe into the complexity of all of the issues and find real ways to help each other.
When one community, any community, is being attacked, all of us are under threat. All of us, no matter how safe we think we are.
We can have conversations that are both uniting and challenging, that are inspiring and at times uncomfortable.
When you don't know what to do, you do what you know. And everybody in here is an expert in something. So let's use our expertise. Let's build together. Let's change this so that the next generation isn't looking at us and saying, how could they have let this happen? Instead, they're going to say, they won.
There is the kind of patriot I believe us all to be. The kind that will fight each and every day for the ideals of our country. And that's what this movement is about.
I'm really glad that video worked. So as you guys saw, Harness is really about bringing together frontline organizers from our most vulnerable communities and bringing them to the people that shape culture and our storytellers, so the creative community here in Los Angeles as well as all over the world, and to bring them in conversation with each other, to have them be in community with each other so that we can start to tell stories differently. We fundamentally believe that storytelling is transformative. We believe this is how we make sense of the world, and that if we don't become more intentional about the way in which we tell stories and who we tell these stories about, that the problems that we are seeing right now are going to continue. And so America and Ryan and Wilmer really started this with the idea of how can we shift the creative community and the way that it talks and the way that it tells stories so that they're more authentic, that they're grounded in community, and that they're inclusive. They really show, our world as it is. So, yeah.
broadcast media sometimes has a little ways to go on those things.
Yeah.
We were chatting earlier, and I shared that I grew up in rural Oregon, and my community was very white, very Christian, and the first black people I ever saw were on television. It was like LeVar Burton on Star Trek and Reading Rainbow.
Yeah.
And so you want to talk a little bit about like how impactful Hollywood can be and why media is so important.
Yeah, there's this really wonderful woman, Heather McGhee. She's the head of DEMOS, which is a policy think tank based out of Washington, D.C., and they do a lot of research around, what is the real working class? What is the true working class? And she said something that I thought was really powerful. She said, the way that Americans understand each other and the way that they understand the country is through popular culture, is through television. Our country is too big. Like, there's no way for us to fully encapsulate what it means to be America or to be American, right? What we really learn about reality is what we see every single day in our surroundings and in our neighborhoods, and what we see on television or what we see in popular culture right now with things like YouTube and new media. And so, what we believe is that if broadcast television is not representing every community or as much as possible being representative, that it's not actually giving us an accurate portrayal of what this country is. And so we do a lot of work with studios where we go in and we talk with writers' rooms, and we talk about the stories that they tell in their shows and how is it that they can represent different and unique kind of stories and communities in their shows, in order to be able to kind of push that, and in order to be able to help people expand their horizon of who is in my community, who is in my in-group, right? How can I start to complicate that narrative a little bit? And the interesting thing about this is that broadcast television is still heavily watched by middle America. And by people that are not, maybe in kind of like more diverse spaces. And so it's really important to be doing the work of like just being intentional on how we tell our stories in television. I have other people that I know that are doing similar work with athletes and with kind of what's happening with, sports, because it's another kind of place where America faces each other, right? Is everybody unites over sports. And so how can we use that as a way to have some serious conversations as well?
So at Harness, you work a lot directly with America Ferrera, and you're working on programming and showcasing the stories of underrepresented people in media. So can you talk a little bit about like what's your favorite type of programming to put on, and kind of whose story has been like way more impactful than you ever imagined?
Yeah, there's so many, but I'll share a couple. So one of the women that is going to be speaking at our event this Saturday is, her name is Natalie Weaver. She's incredible. She is a young mom from North Carolina, and she has a medically fragile child. Her daughter has been through 22 surgeries, and she's 5 years old. And she became an advocate for healthcare overnight because she realized that if healthcare was taken away from her family, her daughter would die. And so we have been kind of in conversation with her about this whole conversation around healthcare, because she's not somebody that's like, I understand all the policy, although she's learning very quickly, or I'm die hard like political person, right? But she's like, no, I'm fighting for the life of my daughter. And how is it that I can go to people? She went up to her senator, Lindsey Graham, who was like he just helped sign on for this most recent healthcare bill that's being proposed. And she's told him, like, if you represent me, and if this bill passes, you are literally going to kill my daughter. And he was like, I would never want that to happen. And then he turned around and co-signed the bill, right? So it's a real, stories like hers are really important to me, because I think they are incredibly, they're real, you know what I mean? That's not somebody making something up. That's like, this is her life. And similarly, there's another man that we have speaking on Saturday. His name is Gaston. If you're interested in learning more about him, there's a website. It's bit.ly/weareallgaston. But he's undocumented. He came to this country, I think, when he was 6 years old. He's been a community leader with like his church and he's worked at the same place for like 20 years in San Diego, and he has 2 children that are dependent on him, and one of them is autistic. And he's facing deportation now. He has been in this country, you know, for fine, and like DHS knew he was here, ICE knew he was here, and he had to stay. And then just this past few months, he's been told that he needs to leave. So he has an appointment with ICE 6 days after our next event. And if he gets deported, his children have no source of income. So that's another story that we're gonna be sharing on Saturday. But another very real kind of example of like, what are people facing? Because I think what happens when we talk about politics that's really scary to me is that, and even for me, I don't even think of myself as like a political person. I think of myself as somebody who cares about others. And maybe that's like, you know, a little facetious, but I think like really we talk about political issues as if there's not real people that are impacted by them. And I think that when we break apart all of the like, you know, drama and the narratives and the like, you know, chatter, and we just get to like, what is happening? How is this impacting everyday people? I think that's the most important thing, is like the human story, and for us to recognize the humanity in each other, you know, and for us to say, how do we, you know, believe in like the humanness of each other, and how are we, you know, coming together in relationship to build a world where all of us can live and have our basic rights and freedoms? Like, I think that's really the question.
Well, it's very much the idea that the political is very personal,
Yes.
and that, you know, we should be having dialogues about politics in our society because it does impact people, like all the people you just mentioned.
Yeah, yeah.
So important. So as we talked a little bit, there's a direct correlation between media and changing our society. How do you figure out like who you want to bring in front of these executives or at your events, and what stories that's like the perfect situation or time to push them forward?
Yeah. So we've only been around since like January, but the way that we've been thinking about it is timeliness. Like, what are the most timely topics for us to discuss? So whether that's trans, whether that's the Muslim ban, whether that's, you know, whatever issue that might be, we try to think about like what is the most kind of pressing issue that's occurring right now. And it's hard because there's a lot of things going on. And so for us, that's where I go back to just being grounded in community and going to folks and saying, what's happening? What's keeping you up at night? What are the pressing needs on your community? You know, and we work with a lot of community organizations. We work with a lot of foundations. And we say, especially community foundations, and we say, what are you hearing? You know, what are the things that we need to kind of amplify right now in terms of voices that are missing in the mainstream conversation? And so going back to the communities is number one, the most important thing. And then I think the second thing is once we do a lot of work before any event. America and I sit with each person that speaks at our events, and we do several calls where we talk to them about their story. We talk to them about how is it that somebody can support them in their experience and in their work, and how is it that they can best share that story. And we do a lot of that because a lot of the people that we're bringing forward are not people that are polished or people that are used to sharing their story. Some of them are sharing it for the first time. I cannot tell you, getting teary-eyed, but cannot tell you how many calls end in tears because it's really emotional and raw. And so we work a lot with the organizations or with the individuals beforehand to help them be ready to share their story. And then we kind of bring them into this space. And then we try to prep this space so that people come with open hearts. And what we really try to do is, again, like, to me, it doesn't, the liberal conservative dichotomy is not helpful in this moment. I feel like it's really, we just say, look, we're here to share some human stories. Yes, there are political ramifications to these stories, but let's have a conversation about that, you know, and let's have you be in space where when you're talking to somebody who's directly impacted by some of these issues.
So in addition to being very conscious about programming and who you're bringing in, what are other types of things you do to make your events more inclusive?
Yeah, one of the things we do is we try to make sure that in terms of representation, we're trying to represent as many like kind of communities and identities as possible. So we think very intentionally about like who's on the stage and who's not. And I think it's really important for us to constantly be thinking about that, because if you're not recognized as a community, then your issues are not heard. And so for us to make sure that we're being very intentional about that, and I think that's a question for all of us when thinking about building community, is who's part of your community and who's not. For us, we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. And that includes being inclusive of voices that are difficult, right? I think it's really important to have challenging conversations like America mentioned in the video. So we try to really think about how is it that we're building a community that is inclusive of as much diversity as possible. So whether that be ethnic or whether that be political, whether that be socioeconomic background, whatever that might look like, we're really trying to think about building something that embraces the diversity of what actually exists out in the world. So that's number one. And then the second thing that's really important for us is that a lot of this for us when talking about the creative community and talking about storytelling is not in the mind, it's in the heart. So how is it that we talk heart to people, right? So the first part of that is the authentic storytelling, what we hope is authentic storytelling. But the other part of that is we do a lot of art and culture and performance as part of our events. So we have people who sing, we have people who do group performances. We had, at our first event in February, we had this incredible young woman who's a spoken word artist, Zarya Allen. Highly recommend you check her out. She's on our social this week. Our social is at I Will Harness. But she spoke, and Katy Perry was in the audience, and she took video of her spoken word and said, "This literally changed my life," and then actually invited Zarya back to be part of her album release later. So in the sense of like understanding like how is it that art can be used as a way to impact other people on a way that's not just intellectual, but it really gets to like the heart of an experience. This time around, this event that we're doing, we're gonna have a lot of like virtual reality kind of stuff, immersion experiences. There's an amazing kind of different groups out there who are trying to do empathy work, building empathy and connection through virtual reality. And I think that that's something that we're starting to explore more of how do we utilize this kind of like new technology as a way to connect. And being very aware that technology is an incredible tool for connection and community building, and it can also be something that disconnects. And so how do we navigate that?
Yeah, I think VR is definitely a very interesting space for that.
Yeah.
I've definitely heard of stories around veterans and using VR, or people who can't travel for various reasons, putting them in VR and like letting them experience a place they've never been in the world, and how empathetic that can create people. But then it's like, will that be totally socially isolating if we're all in our little VR machines?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one of the things that I'm super excited about is we have one experience where we're gonna have a big shipping container in front of our event, and they're called Portals, this organization it's called Portals, and you walk in and you sit down in the shipping container and you're talking to somebody from a different part of the world that's also sitting in a shipping container, and you have a conversation. So we're gonna be doing that at the event, which I think will be amazing. We were supposed to have Mexico City, but that is no longer happening because of the earthquake. I think now it's Honduras. And then the other thing that I'm really excited about with VR is we're gonna give people the ability to actually experience the ice shelf as it's melting, which I think is really important because of what's happening right now in terms of climate change and just the earthquakes and the hurricanes and all this stuff. So I think it'll be amazing for people to actually see how the environment is shifting so quickly.
That sounds amazing. So I have a very specific question about Aladdin, the live action movie, which you are consulting on.
Yeah.
So since Aladdin was announced, there's been issues around whitewashing and people being upset about that. And for those of you that don't know what whitewashing is, specifically with Aladdin, it's making Middle Eastern characters played by white actors. There was a rumor that Tom Hardy was going to play Jafar, which got pretty far on social media. I think there was like a hashtag around it. Not true. And now there's controversy that they're adding a Norwegian prince as one of Jasmine's suitors,
Yeah.
and it's also, you know, a production made by Guy Ritchie,
Yeah, yeah,
who's a white man.
yeah.
So how do you kind of approach that consultation for them? Where do you see successes? Like, obviously, you know, you're not the one producing this, so you don't have total control over every decision they make.
Yeah, yeah, it's been incredible. So there was a question when I first started engaging with Disney about whether or not to do this work, because yes, I give them advice, but doesn't mean they're gonna take it, right? But for me, I was like, Disney is the single biggest creator of culture in the world. This movie is gonna be seen by hundreds of millions of people, right? So for me to have say in what that looks like is incredibly important. So again, that idea of responsibility, I wasn't like, I'm the expert, let me tell you like how Aladdin should be. I went out and I talked nationally and internationally to different communities, from Muslim, Arab, South Asian communities, and we brought together a whole group of experts that came and spoke with Disney executives about Aladdin and representation. And the interesting thing for me has been that, first of all, Disney has been incredible. They've been so warm and trying to implement different recommendations. And having been on the other side of the curtain, I can be like, wow, so many of the things that are like reported on are actually not true. Like Tom Hardy was never actually spoken to about this movie, you know? So that was interesting. But it's been a wonderful experience. It's hard because there are lots of conversations that I've had around things like costume design or the script, where I make recommendations and they'll meet me halfway, but it's not perfect. And so I'm not sure how the movie will turn out. It's a little bit of a risk, you know? And I'm worried that my community is going to come back to me and say, what is this? But at the same time, I have to say, this is actually the first time in history that Disney has done this in all of the movies that they've made, which is interesting. And
made a lot of movies.
After the panel that we did with them, they are very interested in doing community engagement around every movie that they do, which is a huge win. And so I'm really hopeful. I think there's been a systemic shift within Disney, which I think is great. And I think the movie will be wonderful. And I don't know exactly where it's going to end up on the spectrum of good to bad, but I do know there's been an incredible progress in the right direction. And there's good people that are working on it. So, but you're also trying to change an industry. And this is the conversation America and I have all the time. You're trying to change an industry that has a very specific, you know, perspective and has had that kind of narrative for a really long time around colorism and all of these things. And so how do you shift them quickly? So, yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best luck and can't wait to see the impact you make on Disney.
Thank you.
Talk about community and culture.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.